appreciate it. And that's one of my goals in this process is sharing this message with other people, teachers, parents, administrators, or anyone in general who has gone through an emotional struggle and then wants to figure out how can I get myself through that emotional struggle without going into something that might be a little darker, like
This
perhaps.
particular interview may appear like it's for teachers, and it definitely is. But the truth is, I think we are all struggling with the same things that cause teachers to become emotionally fatigued. It's the same thing that's fatiguing all of us in life. Diane Manser is an 18-year high school English teacher in a suburban district of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The teaching profession tends to be viewed as a content profession, and Diane's mission is to expand the conversation to also include the emotional impacts of teaching, so the profession is universally understood more holistically and teachers' emotional strength becomes a priority. Her book, titled I Didn't Sign Up for This: One Classroom Teacher's Journey Through Emotional Fatigue to Personal Empowerment, is one part of Diane's mission to empower teachers and to share this important message so teachers are supported and continue thriving in the profession they want to love. Diane, thank you so much. I can see that you're joining us from the classroom, which is so appropriate.
I am. Thank you so much, Melanie, for having me on. What an honor and an opportunity. I'm so grateful to you, and I can't wait to engage in this conversation. But yes, behind me is the backdrop of where I sit. I'm at my desk, and this is behind me one of my favorite classroom signs, as well as some nice lights and some other classroom decor to make the space inviting.
Very fun and happy, which of course is the impression that I get, that you are just, I know you'd be my favorite teacher, especially because you teach writing, right? So
English to ninth graders, so reading and writing and our speaking skills. But thank you very much for saying that. I really
oh
appreciate
yeah.
that. Thank you.
That was my favorite subject in high school. And with all that pink and your smile, I'm sure you are the favorite teacher of most of the youth in your class, but it's been so eye-opening to read your book. I kind of suspected that teachers are dealing with some challenges, especially with the influx of these smartphones that just bring so much distraction to the kids, and just kind of this general lack of respect, I think, that we seem happening, even not even just in our youth. I would just say generally, and again, I think social media has a lot to do with it, because sometimes we get this thing we sometimes refer to as keyboard courage, where we get a little snarky with each other, and it's sort of infiltrating our interactions. But anyway, reading your book and seeing how challenging it is to be a teacher, even beyond the expected challenges, has made me very interested in what you're teaching, and just interviewing you and bringing your book to light. So it's
Thank
really
you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. That's one of my goals in this process is sharing this message with other people, teachers, parents, administrators, or anyone in general who has gone through an emotional struggle and then wants to figure out how can I get myself through that emotional struggle without going into something that might be a little darker, like perhaps like a negativity response or a reactive response. Like, how do we get
yeah.
ourselves through it, be resilient and joyful, confident and empowered, and but also handle the issue that we're dealing with. So
Love that. Love that. And I want to riff off of that, but let me bring up the first question, because I think that what you just said is a perfect segue into it. And that is just, what inspired you to write this book? And I know that you do have a little story of your own, a lot of stories of your own. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you came to actually wanting to write a book about these things.
yes, absolutely. So this takes me to when I was emotionally fatigued, feeling stressed in the teaching job, but also having this conflict because I love teaching. And I'm the teacher who every September, like, I can't wait to get back into school. It is hard to let summer go, but I can't wait to restart. I can't wait to meet my new students. I can't wait to see the students I had the previous years. I love my colleagues. I love where I get to teach. And then also within me, I was feeling this struggle of like, am I going to make it through this school year? can I even make it X number of more years until retirement? I don't even know if I'm going to want to come back next year. And it was a very conflicting feeling that I had going on. And a lot of that was the stress I was dealing with within the classroom setting of feelings that I thought I couldn't really change. So what ended up happening was I got to sort of a breaking point, and then I ended up going to see a mental health therapist, and he just inspired me and he helped me so much to understand myself on a deeper level. And I was able to transfer those lessons and those strategies into my classroom life and also my personal life, which was a game changer because then it was like everywhere in my life I was becoming more empowered. And his one of his strategies was for me to journal. So
Yeah.
he asked me to journal because I would go to see him on like a Tuesday and in the evening, and he would ask me how the week was going and what was happening. Well, I may have had some big feeling of stress that was in my mind, or I would wake up in the morning and be kind of playing out the day's stressors, trying to figure out how to navigate them better. I would already be feeling this dread of walking into a certain class. And I would just sort of go to him and be like, no, I'm doing okay. Everything's fine. But the journaling helped me to center the conversation. So I would go to see him and I would be like, actually, last Wednesday, this thing happened in class, this thing happened in my school day, or this thing happened at home. And it really like disrupted me. It really kind of like it was in my mind for hours or even for a whole day. I'm kind of over it now, but it really
Mhm.
bothered me then. And then that's what we would examine. So instead of me just continuing to repress it or sort of push it away, I started to realize that there would be more people, especially teachers and especially our newest teachers, who aren't gifted this message that we are in an emotional profession and that sometimes we can be personally bothered by what happens in our classrooms. And I thought if I could get that message out to other teachers and I could share that message with others, then maybe I would be helping other teachers and maybe our newest teachers to be stronger when they start and they wouldn't have to go through the same pains that I did to get to where I am now. And that's really what inspired me to start the book, to finish the book, and now hoping to get the book out there.
I really felt, as I read your book and got to the point, I got to see a lot of the different experiences that you had, of course, that led you to your counselor, Lou, that you write about.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like I gained a lot of value, like even monetary value of
Thank you.
the advice and the encouragement and the direction that he gave you, because there's so many things he said to you. And of course, we'll talk about this more a little later. But I just want to say that this particular interview may appear like it's for teachers, and it definitely is. But the truth is, I think we are all struggling with the same things that cause teachers to become emotionally fatigued. It's the same thing that's fatiguing all of us in life. And so there's really a lot of great value in reading your book for anybody. So
Thank
let
you.
me get to the second question, because this is where we get to really dive into the meat
Great.
of your book. And that is, what do you hope people will take from reading your book? And I guess you could say, what do you hope teachers,
Mhm.
especially, will take from reading your book?
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate what you just said, and I completely agree with you. Going to see Lou and doing so much reading that I did, and podcast listening, introspective work, and growth, not only has helped me be a better teacher, I'm a much better parent. So I have two children. I have a daughter who's 11 now. I have a son who's 9 now, and my parenting has been so much better because of this work that I have done that I share in the book. So while it's cemented in my teaching experience, because it's emotional and it's things that can be emotionally triggering or affecting to us, it really is quite transferable. So I'm really appreciative that you noticed that. And I'm hoping that people will gain that from reading the book. So when I share this with others, my hope is that we can become empowered in the positions, in the spots in our life that are bringing us down. So if we can examine at the end of a day, this incident or this experience kind of stayed in my mind. It sort of like rented that space in my mind. And I'm making dinner or I'm calling a friend and I'm complaining about this thing or I'm sharing this thing. And I'm not able to move myself away from expression to solution. I think that's what we have to examine. And that could come in our relationships with colleagues, family, as a parent, teachers. And for me, it was being a parent and also a teacher. That those were my two spots where I really had to examine myself. But my hope is that people will read this book they'll gain empowerment strategies of their own, share them with others. They can get empowerment strategies from other people. And then the next thing you know, the stresses we have in our life, while they're still there, we've lowered the volume on them and they're not taking over our life. So then we can focus in our life what we want to focus on, the things that bring us joy and the things that make us excited and the gifts we get to give to others. And that's what I'm really hopeful for.
I think we need to kind of move into really starting to define the things that bother teachers and that bother people. And so I have your book on my shelf and I just grabbed it. And so what I want to do is there's a lot in here that I highlight and I take notes. I dog your pages. So there's probably some people who just hate my tactics, but they work for me because
I love it. I love that. I do the highlighting too and the annotating. Then you can go back and you can say, oh, yeah, I really like this part. Or you can go back later as a reminder. I did that for all my books too. And I need a little insight here. I go to that page and I'm like, oh, yeah, I needed that perspective. I'm so glad I had saved that.
it's a good way to learn for sure. So there's
Yes.
some things I kind of want to bring up here at the start. And kind of bounce through some of my, like I said, my highlights. And there's one line here, and this I believe is in your introduction, if that's what it's called. But yeah, introduction. And this I think is really, it's just a one sentence, but I think it really gets to the core of what you're trying to do for teachers. And you say, I asserted that everyone needs to see teaching not just as a content driven profession, but also as an emotional profession. And this idea that it's so emotional is really the theme that goes throughout your book. And that might, to someone who isn't a teacher, they may not fully understand just how emotional. And when you use the word emotion, like there's a lot of feelings that come with emotion, but there's definitely frustration, anger, the disrespect that you sometimes get. Some kids that are follow rules and are happy to be there, they make life a joy. They make teaching a joy. But
Oh, yeah.
gosh, there's just so many examples, and I know that it's not uncommon where we've just got such troubled youth who have not learned how to be respectful, or are there just to their entertainment is to challenge you. And so you start out at the beginning. Teaching is both rewarding and worth all the hard work, and also exhausting and defeating. One class period can make me feel purposeful, smart, and valued, while students in the next class period can make me feel low, self-conscious, and embarrassed. Teaching is exhilarating and overwhelming. It can make me feel like I'm doing something much bigger and more purposeful than myself. And it can also make me feel so frustrated that I begin to count the hours until the end of the school day, school year, or teaching career. Um, would you just summarize? I love your first day of school that you write about in here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that first experience is really the epitome of what creates this level of frustration to the point that you finally needed to go and see a counselor. Could you
Mm-hmm.
just kind of describe that experience a little bit? I think that would go a long way to really put a lot more meaning into the things that I'm reading.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we are in our teacher training programs, whether it be an undergraduate program or a master's level program, we are focusing so much on what are we teaching, why are we teaching it, and how are we teaching it. We're also focusing on the assessment piece, like how do we know our students got it? How do we know they're going to retain it so we can transfer and we can keep using it? We don't talk too much about the emotional side of it or provide ourselves strategies with like, what is your response going to be if things don't go too well? Or if maybe you have a class or a few students in front of you who are disengaged or disinterested or really difficult to reach. I teach high school, so the secondary experience will be different than the elementary experience. But I had the beautiful gift of interviewing a lot of teachers when I was writing this book, or teachers who heard that I was writing it and they were like, listen, I want to tell you about my story. And then they would share with me as elementary teachers how difficult it is when you have classes that are hard to control. Students who want to raise their hand every couple seconds and say something, or they get out of their seat, or it's difficult for them to complete a task. They take a long time. And it's not that we're not sensitive to these things, but when you're talking about that throughout a full school day, it can become very tiring. And then sometimes we can question ourselves. we can feel like maybe I'm not good enough, or I'm not tying something up here. Or if there were another teacher in this classroom, they wouldn't have these same problems, or the students wouldn't react to them this way. There wouldn't be those issues. I've come to learn that the stories I've experienced are very universal. And I've come to learn that while other people may have different contexts, the feelings have been the same. So my very first day of teaching, I'm going all the way back to 2006. My very first day of teaching, I am completely prepared. I mean, I have like every little detail down to like the pencil sharpened and the pencil sharpener or pencil holder, all figured out. And I just hadn't considered what I would do or what it would feel like if a student resisted a rule or challenged me. I went into it assuming that, they would just kind of listen, or there would be expectations and respect, and there wouldn't be any issues. So on that very first day, I'm young and I'm new out of college, and I have my first teaching experience, and I'm really excited. And I had a student who did present me a challenge, who challenged something that I had asked him to do. And learning so much about students and my own personal growth now, I would not have responded to the student the way I did all those years ago. But it did challenge a teacher belief I had. I had a belief that when the teacher says something, the students do it. I thought that's kind of how it worked. So when he did not, it challenged that belief I had in myself. It challenged that intrinsic value I was holding from my own experiences. So then I reacted. So my reaction at the time was to kind of double down and to dig in. And I like restated the request, and I expected
Yeah.
it to be
So
done.
this was a youth who came with a coffee.
Yeah, that
So
was the
that was
context.
Yeah, the context
Mhm.
was he came to class and you're like, "Oh, okay, throw in the trash," and he was not throwing out his coffee and he kept
Yeah,
showing up with it, and so I wanna
yeah.
read this part because this kind of starts at the story,
Mhm.
to have you continue. It says, "Teachers live in a system in which we assume we are in charge and in control because the system is set up with these perceived expectations." And you really make a good point here, and that is the fact, and I think this is the kind of the heart of the problem in some sense, is that the way that our school systems are set up, they give you the rules that you're supposed to enforce, and but they don't ever really address the fact that some people are just not rule followers,
Yeah.
and they put you in a hard position because what
Mhm.
happens is and what you're finding out here, and is that you actually are not in control.
Mhm.
You're told you're in control, you're expected to be in control, but you're not in control.
Yeah.
So then when you have a youth or a group of kids who decide they want to make sport of defying you, and then getting the whole class to kind of fall in line, because sometimes they're leaders.
Yeah.
Suddenly, as I read your book and I read these kinds of stories, it's like, oh, I could just feel your frustration
Mhm. And
and,
the hurt of it too.
the hurt
Yeah,
of it
the
because it's
frustration,
so.
also the hurt of it, because, like,
Right,
when
who
you're
wants to be disrespectful? I mean, you're
yeah,
there, you're happy, you wanna give, you wanna be a light in their life, and they
yeah.
won't let you, and that's painful.
Yeah, it is, and also feeling like, well, where do I go now? Like, what other solutions do I even have?
Mhm.
And also this feeling of like, um, you start to question yourself and sort of doubt yourself, and that's very painful. So if we've ever experienced anything that hasn't gone well, and then we feel personally like responsible for that, or we feel like that person was doing it to us personally, it's
Yeah.
really hard to shake that. And people experience this in all the ways. I mean, people get mad when they're in traffic and someone cuts them off, and they feel like, oh, you did that to me. Or if you ask someone politely to do something and they say, nope, I'm not doing that, and you're like,
It's
okay,
almost shocking because
yeah, you're like, I guess you're just not going to listen to me. Okay. And it's like, yeah,
I
it
would never
really,
do that to someone else.
right. And
Like,
that's the
why
other
would
thing
you
too.
do
It,
that
it
to me?
challenges your values, because if you're the
Yeah.
person who would never have done that, all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're like, well, I would never have done that. So now what do I do as the person that's being done to? And
Yeah.
plus you have this whole class kind of looking at you and you're trying to assert yourself and be in charge. But yeah, I love your point about, thank you for bringing it up, the control. Like, I didn't have control over the school rules at the time. It was
Yeah.
just the idea of like, there's no food or drink outside the cafeteria. And I was a brand new teacher, and I just wanted to make sure that I followed the school rules and my students knew the rules and we all followed them so that I wouldn't get in trouble for not following the school rules. So when this person came in with coffee, I just said, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we can't have any coffee in the classroom. There's no food or drink outside the cafeteria. And maybe it was a new school rule. I don't even know because I was new to the school. But yeah, he didn't appreciate that. And at this point in my career, I would have taken a much different approach, a way different, not a direct, a sideways, side door kind of approach. And it would have landed fine and it would have been
Yeah.
an issue.
I love that. You do see a lot of growth, in your process, and now I understand because you were journaling, so I'm sure
Mhm.
that we got to see kind of the growth as you learned, and you
Yeah.
give some excellent advice that I think is good for everybody who's dealing with these kinds of confrontational situations, because your first experience was not very successful with him.
No, yes, not at all. And
I think we should
unfortunately,
point that out. It can
oh, yes.
not be.
Yeah, the book is through and through honest. It's incredibly vulnerable. It's honest, and it was by the end when I was getting ready to put it out there into the world, it was a complete act of bravery. I was like, here
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is, and I hope that it'll make a powerful difference. But yeah, the experiences that we have, we may be positioned to be in charge, but doesn't mean we're in control. And as parents, we can say the same thing. And as teachers, we can say the same thing. And the best we can do is really influence what we have in front of us. And we can sort of revisit and recover and recalibrate ourselves. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean, though, just because I like a classroom of high interest and high engagement and people who walk in and want to be in the space, that is what I'm going to have. I might have 90% of that, which I'm like, this is great. I might have 30% of that, and I have to then work a little harder to get myself farther down that percentage timeline as I can.
So you have a chapter in here titled "The Snacky Girls,"
Mhm.
and this is a little later on, a little further in your teaching career. But
Mhm.
essentially, you ran into a similar problem, except this time it was a group of 6 girls
Mhm.
who all decided that they were going to do what they wanted to do and eat what they wanted to eat, and really disrupted the classroom.
Mhm.
If you'll describe them a little bit, because I think it rolls really well into the lessons that it's what, if I remember correctly, it's what drove you to go seek counseling, was dealing with these girls.
Yes. Yeah, it was. And I'm so appreciative to that group. I'm so appreciative to that experience. It really is hard to see it that way at the time whenever we're dealt stress and we're dealt something that we wish we hadn't needed to deal with. But it really was this like breaking point for me because I was about 12 years into teaching and I had experienced a lot. And I had gone through a lot of change and I had improved in a lot of ways. And yet I was still coming back to these same themes if I was faced with students who perhaps were disrespectful or disengaged or disinterested, or maybe they just kind of were always like toes to the line or toes over the line of like accommodating class expectations. And it just would sort of always make me feel this feeling of like disapproval and rejection and not good enough. And just overall, like, I wasn't, if there was another teacher in place, they wouldn't have treated that teacher that way. So it made me feel a bit like a doormat. And I kept coming across that. It wasn't necessarily every semester, it wasn't necessarily every school year. But when it would come up, I would be like, man, there that is again. And it like would evade my being. It would be in my thoughts driving home. It would be when I was making dinner. I would wake up and think about it, you know? So when I got to the Snacky Girls, this group of 6 that I had in the class, it was the very first day of school. We're in early September. You don't know anyone's names. You don't know where they're coming from. Are they new to the school? I'm at a high school. Maybe they've transferred in. Maybe they've gone to the middle school together. You just don't know this information yet. And they came in and it was just like an immediate power. 6 kids, all super excited to be together, and it was an energy of like not they didn't bring out the best student selves in each other as they could. And it was a surprise. I just wasn't expecting it on the first day, just like I wasn't expecting the other situation on the first day. But I had learned a lot, and I had learned a lot of strategies. So I worked the strategies that I knew and I had learned, and I brought in the right supports from the school, and I did everything much better than my first day 12 years prior. And I landed myself in the same emotional stress and frustration and just feelings of like, man, why bother? Or like, why would I want to keep coming back to this job in this manner if I'm going to be dealing with that? And it just pervaded the classroom. Kids who would have been fine, all of a sudden they were disrespectful and they were doing bad behaviors, and ended up being a really, really tough class. So I kind of knew I couldn't shake it anymore. I knew I needed to get some serious help. So I called a therapist who was near me. I didn't even know him. I had no recommendation. I just put it into Google. He answered the phone and he was like, "Come on in, we'll get you straightened out." And I thought, okay. So I actually,
I love wow that you teach about.
oh,
Before
what a
we jump to
gift.
Lou, I just want
Yeah.
to insert one more major challenge that
Hmm.
drove you to make that call. And then I want you to really talk about him and what he taught you. And
Sure.
the other challenge is really something I think we all kind of expect, but I'm going to read again from your book. And you say, every time I entered class enthusiastically and gave an exuberant greeting and was met with students who couldn't even glance up from their phones, a part of my love for teaching died. Every time I posed an interesting question for discussion or journal writing, and I watched students turn to their phones instead of engaging in the conversation, a part of my love for teaching died. Every time a student argued with me about their phone, a part of my love for teaching died. Every time I tried to teach a writing skill and I'd see students' eyes glued to a computer game, a part of my love for teaching died. And I think that's so, we've got this new problem, and you kind of define them. I mean, for a
Yes.
while the districts didn't even know what to do with it, and sometimes they would allow it or sometimes you can't, and then you had the whole get rid of the coffee cup battle. um, and I'll just read a little bit more farther in this chapter. It says, it wasn't that the students in front of me didn't care, though that is how it seemed. It was because we had allowed them to access such a strong pacifier, and I underlined that because I think it's that way for all of us at times, that they
Hmm.
weren't able to unfix their eyes or their brains. And then a little farther, you say, no longer did I want to be part of a system that devalued my lessons and my attempts at teaching skills. And then one more little line here, and I'm going to have you talk about how this really drove you to the solution. I also faced the truth of how electronics were making me feel as a classroom teacher. They were making me feel devalued, underappreciated, frustrated, and rejected. No one wants to feel this way from their job. So I think it's really important. I just kind of wanted to put a little exclamation point on that. That it's not just the fact that you're dealing with moody, angsty, disrespectful teenagers, because I'm sure they've always existed, but now you have these pacifiers that are literally addictive. Like, it's not just a comparison. They really are addictive. They're designed to be addictive.
Yeah.
And you're having to compete with that and what that does to you. And so just all of this disrespect. So you call
Mhm.
up a just randomly, you found this amazing
Yeah,
person.
I
And
did.
so I'd love you to talk about your first meeting, kind of what you took from it.
Sure. So, and I appreciate you sharing about the cell phones, electronics too, because that has been. I mean, if we're following the news, how many districts and states now are trying to implement bans and proactive measures. But we really have been in this world for about 10 years, and it's been very confusing to students and to teachers and to parents. It's been very hard to figure out how to navigate this and how to balance it. And in some cases, I think you can walk into class and you have no problems at all with it. And it's just like there's really not an issue. In other classes, you're like, this is a huge issue, which means learning is quite secondary. We're not really here to learn. We're not really here to challenge and try. We're here just to kind of get through the day in our isolated spaces. So, yeah, what you just read was really powerful for me. I had to make that, I had to see myself in the problem, and I had to work toward a change. So when I go to Lou for the first time, I called him, and 2 days later, I'm in his office. I actually couldn't believe how efficient it was. I was so grateful to him because I was in such a bad spot, and I was feeling really bad in a lot of ways. And the fact that he was willing to see me so quickly, I would really appreciate it. And so I sat in his office, and I was trying my best to tell him, like, I'm a really happy person. I love my life. I'm so lucky. I feel guilty that I even am upset with things that are happening in my life. I feel like I'm not appreciating things. I was going through all of it, trying to untangle it for him. And he just was kind of sitting back, relaxed, listening to me. And he just sort of slowly nodded. And he was like, okay, I know what the problem is. And he was like, you have completely, in almost all ways of your life, allowed yourself to be disempowered. You have power and you've handed it to other people and they're just doing whatever they want with it. And you need to reclaim your power. He was like, you are just, he's like, you're powerless, you're disempowered, and you have allowed other people to hold your power and play games with it. And I was like, nah. I was like, well, that's not true because I have a career and I have a family and I have a house and I'm self-confident. I can present in front of people and I can run my lessons and I can run my job. I don't need help from people. I can do it myself. I was like, I'm very powerful. I was a college athlete. I was a captain. People came to me to mediate problems. I'm funny. I tried everything to tell him he has to be wrong. And he was like, are you sure? Then why are you here? Trying to defend yourself and explain all these problems that go right back to the fact that you've handed your power over and you're not willing to reclaim it. You're just letting people play games with it. And I was like, oh man. So the session sort of went like that. It was only 45 minutes, but it packed a big punch. And I remember driving home, just like I just saw it playing out everywhere in my personal life, in my school life. I just had examples coming at me, flooding me. And I just, I felt so mad, frustrated, like not at the circumstances, at what I had allowed to occur in so many places, and not just kind of putting a stop to things and putting my value of who I am as a person and what I offer as the highest priority, as the highest visual for other people to see and then just automatically respect without even me having to say anything. And I just saw it playing out in so many ways. So he really, what a gift to get someone like that to see you and then to clean you up, to tell you the truth, and then to be. And he just said, we're going to do this work, and it's going to be tough some weeks, and you're going to get through it. And then he gave me some homework. I want you to find a book about empowerment, ideally written by or about women. I would like you to listen to some podcasts. I would like you to start journaling about your experiences when you feel empowered, when you feel disempowered, when you feel disrupted by something. And then that's the journal that I talked to you about a little while ago that has turned into this book.
Turned into the book.
Yeah.
And there's something that that really was pulled out by him, and I resonate with this, and I think a lot of us do, because you really are making the point, and it's part of your subtitle, that we are dealing, that the teacher journey is very emotional. We have to realize it's an emotional job, and we don't always realize that. And he pointed out this concept of the inner child. So I'm going to read a little bit from your book on that.
Yeah.
So we have this inner child. The inner child, according to this psychological theory and my interpretation from learning about it, is our alert system, our alarm. Our inner child is our emotional state. That's right there. It's so key. Our inner child is our emotional state. The inner child's needs are very strong, just as an actual child's needs are very strong, and these needs show themselves in varied ways, depending upon what it is that affects us emotionally. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I'm just giving people samples of your book here, but it says, to calm our inner child, to take control, which is the thing you needed to do, is become empowered, take control of the driver's seat, and to reach peace, the inner child has to be nurtured, validated, soothed, and loved. And you talk about, and he taught you about being able to just identify where are these emotions coming from. And I think ultimately we all have inner childs. We all have, sometimes it's from childhood trauma, but I think it's just something that we all experience growing up.
Yeah.
I know that in school, I was always a little uncomfortable. Never knew if I fit in, wasn't one of the popular kids. We carry these insecurities with us. And I think that was, I know, putting myself in your shoes as I read the story about the snacky girls. I'm like, oh, I knew those girls, and I would be right back there with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been that teenage girl that was over in the corner watching them be loud and boisterous and, and not fitting in, and kind of just, So I thought it was so good, and that's really the part too in your book where, and I don't know if you can see this, but I underlined it and
Oh
I
my
made an
gosh,
arrow
thank you.
and I wrote the fix. So this is
Yeah,
where once you identify that inner child and
yes.
where the emotions are really coming from, then you really outline some of the solutions to
Yeah.
gaining that control.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you. Thank you for pointing that out. That was, I had never heard of that before. So maybe some of your listeners and audience members are familiar with the inner child network and the
yeah,
power of reparenting and nurturing our inner child. But for me, that was very new. And when I
yeah,
learned it from Lou and then I got a chance to explore it, I was like, wow, what a game changer. Because what was happening to me a lot too was my inner child will get affected when I feel a disapproval. I
mhm,
want people to like me. I like being a people pleaser. I like maybe making people feel good about themselves. And that usually comes from building people's confidences and making them feel good around me. So it is really difficult when I have a sense or I have an actual example where I think like someone is disapproving of me or I haven't pleased someone in some way. So I used to overwork or I would do things that really
mhm,
weren't in my best interest or like my best like time management or stress level because I knew the person would want me to do it or I knew the person would expect me to do it or I would be like, you know what, it'll just be easier and I won't have to deal with other stress of like what their reaction is going to be if I just do this. But that wasn't serving me at all. So what I noticed was that in all those examples, I would be giving my power away, which is the thing that I was coming back to and having trouble with over and over again. So I think in this learning, what I recognized is if we can identify, if we're brave enough and willing to do this inner work and to say, I don't want to live in this stress. I don't want to live in these bothered feelings. I want to feel better. I want a different state of mind in my day. Then we have to look at what is the thing that keeps coming up that's bothering us. What is that signaling to? So for me, it would be this feeling of disapproval. Over and over again, I would feel like I wasn't good enough, or it was a disapproval feeling. And then it's a matter of like identifying that, validating it, nurturing it, like, kind of reparenting it, and then looking to solution. And as I was getting better at identifying it and then validating it, I started to see that while that situation was making me feel that way, or that situation did make me feel uncomfortable or kind of disrupted me, it wasn't the full of my reality. So here I was spending so much of my time focusing on one example in my life when I had tons of other examples of my life where that wasn't the case at all. So I was able to sort of like continue sort of removing myself, distancing myself, not taking things as personally. And then I
yeah,
kept on working through solution because I was like, well, I am concerned that I'm going to be disapproved here. But really, I'm mad at myself for
yeah,
allowing myself to be disapproved or to be disrespected.
yeah.
So
So
the
it's sort of a
work,
multifaceted, it's very
absolutely.
complicated, when
Yeah.
that's going on.
And the work has to
Yeah,
come in somewhere. So I chose then to put the work in solving the problems as opposed to
yeah.
continuing to feel the problems. Yeah.
Well, you've done an excellent job of defining the challenges I think that our teachers are facing, our school systems are facing. And we need to address them because educating our youth and even just teaching them to be respectful. Unfortunately, that lesson is falling on you a little more than it should be. It should be happening, I think, more at home, but unfortunately, it is the problem that we're dealing with. Um, and I do want to point out that you provide the solutions. You really, you itemize them. And we're not going to go through that now because I really want people to buy your book. And the
Thank
truth
you.
is there's no way that we could do it justice in the amount of time that we have. But you really do provide the answers. And I believe they're the answers that we all need when our inner child is being offended by something, and we all have that inner child. So it's really an important book for beyond teachers. But I do
Mhm.
want to shift into my next question for you, and that is just to ask you how you came up with the title and the cover of your book. Your book
Mhm.
is clearly has a very specific market, which is good because those are the people that need it most, which are the teachers. But just take us on the journey for how you made those decisions.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm not too sure if you're familiar with Rob Bell or if any of your listeners are, but in my work with Lou, he encouraged me to listen to podcasts and read books about empowerment and motivation and life lessons. So I ended up following Oprah's Super Soul, and I was listening to a lot of her Super Soul episodes, and Rob was a guest on one of her shows. And I ended up loving his interview. I loved what he had to say. So I thought, oh, let me check out Rob Bell. What is he up to? What does he do? And he has a podcast called The Robcast, in addition to many amazing books, life changing books. So I started from the very beginning. He was probably 6 years into his podcast when I found him, maybe five. But I went all the way back to his very first episode, and I just listened to episode one, then two, then three. And eventually I caught up. I caught up to his present episode, which was about 2 years ago from right now. And in his present episode, he was sharing that he was going to be on the East Coast. He's from California. He was going to be on the East Coast, and he was going to do a 2-day event where you can register for his 2-day event, and you can sit with him and another small group, and you can basically share anything you want, questions
Oh,
about
wow.
spirituality, life, God, situations you've been through, business questions. I mean, he's like open to anything, and he will guide you through a process of self-understanding and acceptance and direction. It's a remarkable experience. I encourage anyone to do it. It was life-changing. So I was listening to this recent episode, and he was going to be an hour from my home. I couldn't believe it. So I was like, well, I have to go. I would love to meet him. Plus, I would love to hear what people have to say. So at the time, I was doing the book, but it wasn't anything I had told anyone about. I was probably about halfway through writing it because I had so many themes that kept on coming up in my book. Those themes were turning into chapters. And then I was hoping that I could share the book with other teachers. So I kind of had a sense that I'm writing a book, or I'm at least writing a lot of ideas, and they're organized. So I thought, well, I guess I could always go and share my book. So about 6 months later, I'm sitting in front of Rob and this small group of 30 individuals who are really amazing people. And we all became very close in just 2 days' time, which is just a remarkable experience in its own. And I told him about this book, and he was like, well, this is fascinating because no one talks about teaching this way. And teachers are probably a bit nervous to share these ideas and perspectives. And he's like, you have to get this out there. So he says, what's the title for your book? And I said, I don't really have one yet, but I think it's September Strong. And he was like, okay. And you could kind of hear amongst the people there that they were like, ooh. They didn't like the title.
That's
So, and I'm like,
that's great. You got to like pilot, test it and see how people would, yeah,
yeah, so
beta test.
I said, well, he's like, okay, all right. He goes, do you have another option? And I said, no, I haven't really gotten as far as the title yet. I'm just like sort of writing these chapters and the ideas down. And he goes, well, tell me. He says, what's the thing teachers say when they're really feeling stressed? They've really had a bad day, or they just don't have a great class and it's February. What do teachers say? And I said, oh, we all say I didn't sign up for this. And he's like, there's your title. And I was like, oh, okay. And then my first thought was, well, it's not a negative book, it's a solutions based book. So I'm trying to build people to recognize, validate, and then empower. So I was like, I don't want it to be seen as negative. And I really had that concern. And I said that to the group. And he goes, well, you have a subtitle option, right? And he goes, what do you think you experienced and where are you now? And I said, well, I'm not really there. It's always a work in progress, but it's something I've gotten a lot better at. And I think we have to keep practicing these things to get better at them. And I said, but yeah, it was just like total emotional fatigue. But now I feel more empowered. And he was like, there's your subtitle, which wasn't quite the wording, but it was the context, the gist of it. So I thought, okay, all right. And then as it turned out, someone from that event connected me to an editor. That editor helped me tremendously early in the process. And then I ended up getting connected to a fabulous, amazing book artist who used to work for a self-publishing company. So she knows all the things. Her name is Rachel Moore. She's Rachel Designs, Ninja Designs. And if you want to find her, need anything. And then she took my two opposing titles, really, and she developed this amazing cover for me. And I told her it was important for me to have the power pose, which is the image you see of the woman on the bottom,
Yeah,
because
I was gonna say, I can see that. You've got the exhausted teacher sitting there with their hands on her head up near the main title and then the subtitle is down next to the teacher standing strong with her.
Yeah. And the power pose was important because as I worked with Lou and
Yeah.
our sessions were kind of coming to an end, he said, you will really benefit from seeing a visual when you need a visual. He goes, what's the image in your mind of someone who is fully just engrossed, saturated, filled with empowerment? And I said, oh, it's a power pose. It's like the Wonder Woman power pose. Like
Yeah.
who could really go against Woman and not have a little question they might lose, correct?
Yeah.
And I said that's the empowerment. So it was really important for me to tell Rachel somewhere on the cover has to be a power pose woman, because or an image, doesn't have to be a woman, but that's kind of what we chose at the end. But
Yeah.
so that I just am so appreciative to her because she did such a beautiful job for me, and she's
Yeah.
like,
And the interior is full of
oh,
wonderful,
she is
lots of
amazing.
art, and you've
Yeah,
pulled out
she
quotes and
made
little
it.
quote
She made
boxes.
it really come to life, inviting, interesting. I feel like I've had so many people who have told me, I devoured your book. I read it like in 2 days, and I think a lot of that's attributed to Rachel because of how she designed it,
Yeah.
and how it's not an intimidating book.
Mhm.
The text flows, the pictures keep you engaged, the quote pullouts keep you engaged. So I'm so appreciative for Rob, all his guidance he's given me over the years as a remote mentor. And then I got to meet him. He also has a special endorsement for me in the book. I shared with him about a year after I met him that I was
Oh,
almost done with the book. And I
that's
said,
great.
because of you, it exists. And the title exists because of you. And I said, I just wanted to celebrate it with you. And he wrote me back. He wrote me an email back and he said, send it over. I want to review it for you. And I was like, unbelievable. So
I
then I
love
sent him my draft, and then he wrote me a special endorsement. You'll see some of it on the back cover, and then you'll see a paragraph of it in the intro, like the intro pages. But even that, I mean, what an experience to have one of your spiritual heroes review your
Yeah,
book for you.
to write. Ah, that's
Yeah.
well, and I think that that's a good segue into my final question because there's a lot of people who will be watching this just because they have an important book to write as well. And so, what advice do you have for aspiring authors? And maybe you could throw in there, how do you get somebody like him to write, write a
Yeah.
testimonial? So,
Absolutely. I learned so much in the process. I love this question. Thank you. Because one of the things I wanted to do is share with people like what this feels like. Because I just didn't know. It was my very first experience. And there were a lot of things I learned along the way. My first piece of advice I think is the most important is that if there is something in you, an idea, a message, I truly do believe it's been given to you. It's been given to you like two hands given to you. And I think there's a calling there. So my first piece of advice would be like, don't ignore that. Be interested in that, be curious about that, and just start somewhere. I started with a journal and I had no intentions of having anyone read it. In fact, my husband didn't even know that I was journaling or even writing a book until I went to the Rob Bell event because I was going to be gone for a 9 to 5, 2 days in the summer. And I needed to make sure he was home for the children. And he was like, "You're working on a book?" I was like, "Kind of, yes." It's just so personal. So so I think just kind of start anywhere, blogging maybe, going on a podcast or writing out some journals. Just kind of get this message out. The next piece of advice that I would share with writers is, or someone aspiring to write a book, is that some of the processes are going to be really hard. You may have some self doubt. I had a lot of self doubt. You may feel like, what am I doing this for? You may feel like, is anyone even going to like this or read it? Is it good enough? That is all part of the process. And then if you continue having this pull that you want this message out there and this message is going to serve people, that's what you focus on. The writing is the writing, the way in which you tell a story or organize is the way in which you're going to do it. The message is the most important. It's just like when we think back on our lives and we think about a teacher or a coach, and it's like we might not remember every experience with them, every conversation, everything we engaged in, because our memories only have these like esoteric, kind of generalized views. But we remember how they made us feel. Remember what the experience was like. Remember if it was favorable. We have a few takeaways. And that's what the book is too, any book. It's like you're not going to remember what was on page 33, paragraph 2 necessarily, but you remember what it feels like. So I think also just keeping yourself rooted in the message and the why is the most important. And everything else is important and matters. It has to be professional and good. You don't want to devalue your work, but everything else is a bit secondary.
The feeling, there's a lot that we learn just from words and thoughts, but there's definitely a lot that just comes from the feeling, of experiencing someone's story. And you share, and this is what I love about how you wrote it. You share your stories. I mean, you're definitely providing the example right along with the takeaway.
Mhm.
And I think that makes it so interesting and relatable too, because I've definitely been in your shoes. I'm not a school teacher. I've taught high school kids early morning Bible study, and
Mhm.
that was just 1 hour a day during the school year. But oh my goodness, the same things would come up,
Yeah.
and I was surprised at how much I sometimes felt like I was back in high school,
So weird.
feeling insecure and like I didn't fit in. And here I am, the teacher that's trying to get him to wake up. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
I thank you for sharing that and
yeah.
the conversation being so open about some of your feelings and experiences too. And yeah, it's been a really cool experience. I had one person email me just about 2 weeks ago asking if I lived well, he asked me if I lived in his state because I think you're talking about the teachers in my school. I think you're talking about me. And I was like, I don't even live like I'm half a country away. I think the stories are universal. And I have elementary school teachers who are like, oh, your stories and what you've gone through and what you share. This is like my story, and I
Mhm.
go back to what Lou told me some really important piece of advice because I kept on trying emphatically to express to him, but Lou, these are 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds that are making me feel
Yeah,
weird and
like, this
bad and
should not be
rejected.
happening like
Like,
this.
it's not like it's my neighbor or a friend I grew up with or it's my mom,
Yeah.
these are like kids and like they're trying to figure themselves out. And he said, you are human and therefore you're emotional and you're going to have emotional responses. And an emotional response can come from anything or anyone. He said, people have emotional responses to a 3-year-old's behavior. They have
Mhm.
emotional responses to a stranger they're in the movie theater with. He said it doesn't matter. Emotions are emotions. And that's why that idea of the alarm system comes up. Like it's supposed to get our attention, to have us look at
Yeah.
it, examine it, not repress it, but to get through it. So I loved that advice. And when you told me that, I was like, okay, I can
Yeah.
get behind that. All right.
That's some serious universal advice right there that we
Yeah.
all need in everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
So you have created a movement in this, and you have a website.
Hmm.
So for anybody who's watching this that wants to continue to learn from you or connect with you, they can go to
Hmm.
teachingisemotional.com. I love that.
Thank you.
Just saying what it is.
Yeah.
And once they're there, they can join your mailing list or get a free sample of the book. I suspect that they'll probably decide they want the whole thing, but you do provide that. And then you also have an Instagram and
Hmm.
TikTok,
Yep.
and you have a private Facebook group that they could also join titled Teaching is Emotional. So I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure to get that out there. So anybody who's watching this is just inspired by you and wants to connect with you. And I suspect that's probably a real dynamic Facebook page where you get
Yeah.
a lot of really good conversations. And I think probably every teacher needs to be in there.
I think so too. And it's been so supportive. And I also want to share that there's just parents in there.
Yeah.
So they're, it's private, but I'm trying to protect people and what they
Mhm.
want to share and say. But there's people who are writing to me who are like, I'm not a teacher, but I checked out your book, I saw your website, and I could love some advice from teachers about
See?
my
That's what I'm
child.
saying. We all need this
Yeah,
advice.
or just like parenting advice and can I join your
Yeah.
group? And I'm like, yes, please come into the group. And yeah, there've been a couple questions that have been posed from parents about like, my child is that, presents this way, or, is this stressing the teacher? And maybe this is why the teacher responded in this way. And you have all these teachers who are like, this is my experience, this is what's happened. So it's been really neat. And yeah, the social media piece is a bit new to me, but I definitely feel so good about those I've connected with and have opened this conversation, have helped validate. And every now and then
Mhm.
that Facebook group, someone will write in and be like, teaching is emotional. And they share what happened in the
Share
day.
their story. I bet there's a lot of good stories in there.
And then you
Yeah.
just have so much love coming at them. And what I
Yeah.
appreciate about this whole project is it never has been a complaint. It never has been a whine. It's always people who are like, I love what I do. And 85 or more percent of what I do is really something that makes me feel so worthy. It's this other piece that I have to work through. And I love that. I'm so hopeful to continue it that way. Let's build our empowerment. Let's keep building each other. Let's get through the situations that bother us, and not get just stuck in the murky complaining of it.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're doing. I think it's so important. We definitely need it, even just with the outgrowth of social media and how it's trapping our brains. We need teachers like you that are learning how to be empowered and to be able to get around that. So thank you so much for coming on Triumph Talks. I will be putting the link to your website. I'll pin it in the top comments, so it's really easy for everybody to find.
Okay.
And I will be watching you and cheering for you, and probably joining you and striving to learn all that you have to teach as well. So thank you for coming on the show.
That's great. Melanie, thank you for the opportunity and the great questions and all your work to support someone like me to get the message out there, and so many others you're serving. You're putting in so much behind the scenes work to promote all of us. And I'm so appreciative. It's a huge sacrifice on you and a lot of time and love. And thank you. And I hope our listeners got something out of this conversation. And please just know that I'm very grateful to you for
Oh,
your
thank
support to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you're a reader that enjoys nonfiction books and would like to help out new authors, go to my website, triumphpress.com, and you can sign up to be an ARC reader. ARC is an acronym for Advanced Reader Copy. And that means that you would get a copy of a book before it's released to read it and be prepared to leave them a review when it's published. If that sounds like something you'd like to do, be sure to go to my website and join my Triumph ARC Reader team. If you got something out of this show, please give it a thumbs up because it really helps us to reach more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel because I'd love to have you in my community.